Welcome everyone to the MMA Vivisection with me, Zane Simon, and my co-host, Connor Rebush. We are back
Hello.
this week. What?
I said hello. I thought we would
Oh,
do like a
Jesus.
roll call thing, but I just fucked up the rhythm of the whole intro.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, never speak. Never. That is your new rule.
Not until I receive the electric impulse from the controller Zane holds under his desk.
Not even then. That's just for fun. I just put that in there for the hell of it. From now on, you get to hold up cue cards.
Oh, fuck.
While I talk, you have to write down your prediction, and then you can hold it up.
Damn it. All right. Okay. I need some. Hold on. I have to get some card stock.
Yeah. Anyway, we are here for UFC 219, Cyborg versus Holm. A card that I am frankly thrilling over, but I think you were about to tell me that some people are not.
People were saying that this is like a sort of a weak pay-per-view, and while I wasn't fully on board with that, it has drifted in that direction a bit. Certainly the loss of Jimmy Rivera versus anyone is a disappointment.
Well,
sure. And then there were a couple other fights taken off this card. I don't know. I do look at it and I'm like, aside from the top two, what's the hook? What's the really relevant fight? Not are these well-matched fights, because I think with very few exceptions they are. I think they'll all be fun to watch. But what's the where are the other fights where contenders are lining themselves up for title shots? Where's our momentum going into the new year, which is what we usually get from these end of year cards?
Well, arguably it would be Cynthia Calvillo, who's whether you believe it or not, is the contender on the rise.
Yeah, and I think Calvillo, it brings some interest here. I think Calvillo is like a deserving candidate potentially for Fighter of the Year. She's had quite the rise in 2017, and I like Nurmagomedov Barboza, and I like Cyborg Holm, but
I guess I'd say more generally, and I'm not gonna debase myself or lower myself to the level of the common man here, but I kind of feel like there's like a the big jerk off motion for that read, just because what sells pay-per-views is not relevance, and it has continually never been that.
Yes, but relevance is what sells future pay-per-views, right? 2017 has been a year in which the UFC has, they're still making profits, but the fighters are not making, their profits aren't going up at the same rate as the people who own the company. And pay-per-view buys are definitely going down. We've seen a serious downward trend in 2017. I think a lot of that has to do with things like, going with GSP Bisping and then not giving Robert Whittaker a shot to fight either guy. What does that do for the division in the future? What are we setting up with these fights? They're kind of like short-term cash grabs.
Yeah,
and so then you get.
I can see some of that. I will concede some of that, but I think that a lot of that is not that's not what's going on here. There's nothing on this card that's like that, where you just I guess other than you would say, who does Cyborg fight after Holly Holm? But who does Cyborg ever fight? If that's at that there's no way to set Cyborg up with a fight that.
Yeah, and there's nothing really she can do about that. I'm just saying, aside from Calvillo and either Calvillo or Esparza, more likely Calvillo, or Khabib or Edson Barboza, there aren't really any they're really going to be in some serious shit after they win this fight. You know what I mean?
True. I just don't think that I just don't see that as a reason that fans should be knocking this specific offering rather than just the way the UFC operates as a whole. To me, I look at this five-fight card, do I think that Hooker Diakiese or Calvillo Esparza are going to be the greatest examples of high-level mixed martial arts we've ever seen? No. But I think they're going to be fun fights, and I'm interested in them, and they are they're the little, they're the dressing, the tomato and lettuce on an otherwise really fairly meaty sandwich. I'm excited to see Carlos Condit again. I'm excited to see Khabib and Edson Barboza fight. I'm excited to see Cris Cyborg fight Holly Holm. All those fights to me.
And like I said, I think the undercard fights are good. Like I think that this matchmaking in terms of the competitive matchups has not been an issue at all in 2017. No. It's been a very strong year for the UFC's matchmaking, just not from a momentum perspective. But if I'm looking at these matchups, like there's none of them I don't like. Jury Glenn, I think, is going to be awesome.
Yep.
Vettori Akhmedov makes so much sense to me as a fight for both of those guys. I think Smolka Nicolau is actually fairly relevant for that division, depending on how Nicolau looks. And Elliott De La Rosa is going to be fun too. So like you got two action fighters in that one. So I have no complaints. It's just that I do kind of understand why people are like, nothing from this card jumps out at the average fan. I don't think the way it might to you or me.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is that if Cyborg, Holm, and Nurmagomedov Barboza aren't jumping out to you as the average fan, then literally nothing else on any card is like really going to work for you, you know?
Nothing else besides those two is what I meant.
Yeah, and I don't know. Those kind of fights at the top of a card, they tend to be what carries all interest.
Yeah. Now we're moving into the era where UFC is going to look more like boxing, where every card is going to be super top heavy and everybody is going to be, the fighters are going to be, this is my prediction, that fighters are going to be incentivized to pad their records more because this competitive matchmaking does not gel with the fact that they are not seeing the rewards because yesteryear stars are still the ones getting the big paydays.
The unfortunate part for fighters is that they didn't figure that out 10 years ago when it was still true. It just didn't feel as true because even the people at the top weren't seeing any of the rewards for their competitive matchmaking.
Yep.
You know, when your champions were making like 100,000 and 100,000 or 200,000 to headline a card or something like that. And then the fact that you're getting 5 and 5 or 8 and 8 at the bottom to be matched up competitively is more like, oh, okay, I kind of get that. But
now it feels like the UFC's middle class is dead. There's still an MMA middle class out there. They're in Risen and Bellator, and it just feels like the UFC is like big stars and everybody else.
Yep.
So that's part of it. Anyway.
So on that note, let's get into the bottom of this. It's going to be kind of a quick run, as quick as we can make it. So, like an hour 45. And we're starting out on Fight Path with the flyweight bout, Tim Elliott versus Marc De La Rosa.
I had fun watching Marc De La Rosa's footage in preparation for this. Guy is an exciting fighter. I would describe
I really
him,
like the basic structure of his game a lot.
Yeah, I would describe his work on the feet as that of a boxer puncher. I think he likes to counter, but he's not like defensively. It leaves a little bit to be desired in the pocket. He can be a little upright, a little too confident in having his head there as a target, but he's really, really good when he is the one sticking and moving and lacing shots in between the combinations of his opponent. When his footwork and his nice, crisp, straight shots are all working in concert, he's a very difficult man to deal with on the feet. He moves pretty well, seems to hit pretty hard, and he will let go long combinations if his opponent is not responding, and seems to read things quite well. Though I did watch his fight with, one of his more recent ones. I'll find it real quick.
Is it the Combate 10 fight?
It was his fight with Arthur Oliveira.
Oh, okay, yeah, that one. The Brazilian.
Which was a good fight. But Oliveira did get to De La Rosa with pressure after a while. He just basically made the decision after having a very hard first round to keep throwing when De La Rosa hit him and to keep attacking. And De La Rosa started to have issues. And that means that Tim Elliott can probably give De La Rosa issues in the same way. The difference is that Elliott striking, while it has been getting, better, and it looked pretty good in some of his RFA fights before coming back to the UFC, it's still not a highlight of his game. And so I'm not sure that he can respond with striking pressure the same way without giving up just as many opportunities as Oliveira did for counter punches. But can he get De La Rosa to the ground? Can he do it repeatedly against a fighter who is not often coming forward, who is like trying to circle around the ring? I don't know. Like, it's kind of an interesting question. I think that De La Rosa might actually pose a threat here for Tim Elliott, and I think I'm going to pick him for the upset.
Damn. Yeah, my problem is, and I don't know, this is always one of those things. It's always trouble with a busy striker like De La Rosa, because you never really have a good idea as to just how effective their striking is at stifling high-level offense coming back at them. Because when I watch De La Rosa, I really like his boxing. I really like the volume he works in. I like the combinations he's throwing. I like his willingness to sit in the pocket. But I also see that to be effective, a lot of the times, he has to stand in the pocket and kind of stick himself there. And he gets hit when he does that. Because, it's a hands low, high movement, high upper body movement, defensive style. Jeez, Molly. And
Molly's transforming in the corner.
Yeah, no, that's just her. But it's a high, and it's also it gives him the opportunity to be controlled, because and I've seen I've seen this in a couple of his fights where he's letting these combinations go, and when the guy is out there trying to box with him, they're just totally shut down, and they don't, they end up eating a lot of shots. He looks great, but if they just push forward and try to get him in the clinch, he has to accept it immediately, because the way he's moving, the way he's stepping into the pocket to set up these long combinations, means that he has to be there to be, his body has to be physically in front of his opponent.
Mm-hmm.
I think for Tim Elliott, I don't trust that he can stop takedowns from Tim Elliott well enough if he gives Elliott the opportunity to get in on his hips like that. So to that extent, because I think his hips are just going to be too there to be grabbed by Elliott, I got to pick Elliott to take him down. The other part of this being that De La Rosa has a reasonable power wrestling takedown game that he likes to use, like pick up and slam and stuff like that. But he's a pretty rote top control worker on the ground. Like he'll just kind of throw a few things, do a few things, get kind of stymied, and then end up standing back up on his feet and just chucking it out the window to go back to boxing. And I think that's just going to let Tim Elliott's chain smothering wrestling be too powerful, too overwhelming. Like, you can't be like, I just want to bail on this wrestling game against Tim Elliott. You have to be more of the Ben Wen style of like, oh, you want to grapple with me? Well, here, let me show you that I can be even faster than you and even more opportunistic. And I don't see that. So
yeah, I think no matter what against Tim Elliott, like I can definitely see the size thing a bit playing into that control factor that you talked about. Like the fact that Tim Elliott is 3 or 4 inches taller and is already known as a big flyweight, whereas Marc De La Rosa looks like a fairly small flyweight, if not just like a normal sized one. And but I think that the key to beating Tim Elliott is usually to be assertive. Like you have to not allow Tim Elliott to confuse you with his many looks and his weird movements and his strange kind of pressure. And so I kind of think that if De La Rosa wins here, I think it might happen like kind of quickly and early and surprisingly. If De La Rosa just comes out confident firing those hands, that's when I think Tim Elliott can be caught out. But we'll see.
Yeah. Absolutely, especially on short notice too. Like the longer this fight goes, the more it favors Tim Elliott, where his conditioning is likely to take over. So De La Rosa, he's got some pop. He throws good long combinations. If he can put it on Elliott early, then that may be something. De La Rosa is the underdog, opening at plus 170 and slowly trending up to plus 178. Elliott opening at minus 230. Adjusting up to minus 204 and dropping back down to minus 221. So, I'm not surprised to see Elliott that kind of favorite. It's
Me neither.
a short notice opponent that's pretty unknown, and I like what I see out of De La Rosa, but there's also something to be said for the level of competition on Combate, where
Yep.
fighting some dudes that just look like really incomplete fighters.
Yeah, for sure.
That brings us to the prelims. FS1 prelims flyweight bout: Louis Smolka versus Matheus Nicolau. And man, this is a weird fight because Matheus Nicolau is one of those fighters who I watch him and I'm just like, man, I don't like any part of the way you fight at all. You could beat Louis Smolka and you beat John Moraga, but I hate seeing it.
Why is that?
Because it's literally just a low kick and a left hook. And it's done like one every 30 to 40 seconds. And it's all reliant on his opponent just respecting him enough and being worried enough about his offense to not want to deal with anything. And
he's definitely a counter striker. Dyed in the wool, the man does not like to lead. I will say that much.
Yeah. I'm also a little like, for a guy that he's clearly a very good grappler, I'm not necessarily sold on how good a grappler he is. There's, like that Japanese necktie he got on Bruno Mesquita, that was pretty cool. But he had a lot of ineffective grappling offense in that fight leading up to it. It was not the kind of thing where he just got it to the ground one time and it was like, oh my God, did you see that? And a lot of his takedowns, even, most of them were based off of him landing strikes or, they were dropping his opponent, things like that. It was not, you couple that with his performance against John Moraga, and you really see a guy who's not working a takedown game. You see a guy who is working a incredibly slow-paced counter-striking game. And part of me wonders if that's... I mean, Louis Smolka is just, especially as a striker, he's just a really kind of slow, rote striker. He throws some exciting stuff. He hit... was it Richie Vass with the sweet chin music?
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, he is not the, if the fight's on the feet, he can throw, he's got some all right boxing combinations. He throws some all right kicks. He's just not fast at the elite level of a flyweight fighter.
Mm-hmm. And even on the ground, like speed, he just doesn't seem like much of an athlete.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Is
on the ground, like he's very smooth and very relaxed, but speed is still not really what carries him. On the feet, he's not particularly smooth, and he's also not particularly fast.
Yeah.
So
there's a very good chance that Nicolau just counters him really well and shuts him down, and that's the fight, essentially. But I kind of feel like Smolka is going to actually pressure enough to force Nicolau into ground exchanges and into grappling exchanges. And I just don't know that I like enough of what I see out of Nicolau there. I'm going to pick Smolka in this. I'm going to pick Smolka to outwork him on the mat. And
what do you think about Smolka's wrestling?
I think his wrestling is actually really good. I think he's not great on the initial shot, but he's got really good follow through and really good control on the ground. I mean, he's not, like you say, there better athletes can catch him, and Brandon Moreno did, but there's also something to be said for the fact that Tim Elliott and Ray Borg just had to scramble with him for 3 rounds. And Nicolau's pace is just so slow standing that I don't trust him to just take Smolka out of his game. I don't think Smolka falls into the same trap as Moraga, who we've seen has had this battle of trying to be a more polished fighter that just kind of shut down all of his offensive ability, and then he had to refine it, and he's been a much better fighter since then. But I feel like Smolka can keep up just enough offense to get after Nicolau, and Nicolau seems comfortable enough working off his back too. I have the feeling that he's willing to go to the ground and play off of his back, that I think that he'll give Smolka opportunities to outwork him. So I'm gonna pick Smolka, and I feel weird about it, but I'm taking it.
Yeah, see, I have some concerns about how bold Smolka might be. Like, I don't really know. I don't have any strong feelings. I don't feel confident in knowing how he'll look after 3 straight losses. You know, like the dude has been having a hard time after what seemed like a pretty meteoric rise through the division, where he was just like out grappling everybody he fought and was looking amazing, and then to go from a 4-fight win streak to a 3-fight losing streak just like that. I don't know. If he's not composed enough to push through and push for takedowns and push for strikes, no matter what Nicolau does to him. I listened to Nicolau's fight with Moraga, by the way. John Anik, whose pronunciations I always trust, was pronouncing it Matheus, which Matheus Nicolau, which solidifies my theory that Brazilians are really determined to make Americans who think they're smart look stupid by pronouncing their names the way they look.
Yeah, I that is very likely his name, Matheus Nicolau. Yeah. Which
it's like the first time you say Joe Aldo in front of someone, they're like, "That's not how you say that, is it?" No, it is. It's
Matt. Yeah. Okay. Just for that, I'm really reinforcing my Smolka pick.
Yeah, because that's clearly like Matheus or Matheus, right? That's not Matheus. Anyway, come on, Brazil. Keep it up. If Smolka is not pushing through to, like, if he's not determined to maintain a pace, even if he is, and his confidence is just shaky, Nicolau can slow him down. Like, that's what Nicolau did to Moraga, is he dragged Moraga into his pace. And I rewatched that fight, and I have a little more respect than I did then. At the time, I was just kind of bored by it. Wasn't in the right frame of mind to appreciate it, you could say. But second time around, like, I could at least identify why Moraga was having such a hard time. He just couldn't get any momentum going without being countered. And Nicolau was so patient and so determined to just make Moraga go first that Moraga felt that he was in like a complete bind. He couldn't figure out a way to lead without getting countered. And the counters were pretty solid. So, you know, he was actually like being put under duress, not just, oh, what do I do next? But he was, you know, getting stung by some of those blows. And then he couldn't hang back because then nothing was happening and he'd already lost the first 2 minutes of the round. So he was just in this very difficult position of Nicolau's design. And I can definitely see that happening to Smolka, who is probably more hittable than Moraga by a stretch.
Yeah.
And certainly less effective, like as a counterpuncher, as a boxer in general. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you're saying about Smolka getting Nicolau out of the ground. I also was not super impressed by what I saw in that fight with Correa, with Bruno Correa. But
yeah, like that's the thing. That was the other thing to me, is that seeing somebody, you know, Correa got dropped, but is also a worse striker than Louis Smolka even.
He's got fancier kicks,
but he actually was just willing to take the leap that Moraga wasn't, and was much more effective for it. And it's just like so much of what Moraga was doing in that stretch of the Benavidez Nicolau Pettis fights felt like Moraga just totally losing track of what kind of fighter he wanted to be or thought he could be. But
man,
that may also
hard. It's so hard because of those 3 losses. Like, I just have this feeling that Smolka might be really low right now.
Yeah.
I think I will, since I went for the incredibly bold pick last one, I'll chicken out here and go for Smolka as the more established fighter.
Oh, really? I feel like Nicolau is the less bold pick, but okay.
Yeah, but the thing is like Nicolau he does so little.
So
As
little.
you said, like, really, I don't know what he has to offer if somebody does push through and like force a pace on him. Like what changes in his game at that point? Or does he kind of falter and run out of ideas? Does he turn into a brawler? I don't know yet. Especially not at this level. So I think I like damn it, Zane. This is a hard one.
It is.
Okay. I'm taking Smolka. I'm gonna join you and take Smolka.
All right. Odds at the moment have Smolka as a decided underdog. Opened at plus 120, jumped up to plus 293, and is now plus 215. And Nicolau as a strong favorite, opened at minus 160, dropped down to minus 378, and is currently at minus 268. So.
I don't know. I mean, it does seem. I know Smolka's coming off these losses, but we are only rating Nicolau because of a win over what did look like a fairly flat John Moraga. So
yeah, like a really flat John Moraga.
There's still a lot I feel like we don't know about how he looks at this level. So
yeah, and I mean the thing with Smolka that we've seen losses to Elliott, Borg, and Moreno are that it's really like a much more athletic grappler.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing, is that those losses, they could be hurting his confidence, but stylistically, Nicolau is a pretty far cry from all of those guys.
Yeah.
I don't see him out-muscling and out-athleting Smolka on the ground like that.
And there's even a chance that, you know, had he not gotten submitted early by Moreno, as we saw with, like, the Sergio Pettis fight, like, he probably could have beat Brandon Moreno.
Yeah.
Just because Moreno is very limited and exciting, but limited.
Yeah, he may have at the very least. He would have probably still competed with him.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to a middleweight bout: Marvin Vettori versus Omari Akhmedov. And this is you, so take it away.
Pretty solid fight. Marvin Vettori showed some flashes of improved striking in that fight with Vitor Miranda. Not a ton of variety to it, really, but he threw his hands and he repeatedly let them go. And that is something for a guy who was kind of feeling like a little bit of a man without a country before, like a submission artist who couldn't quite get takedowns against good defensive wrestlers and who couldn't quite like set up his strikes and cleanly outpoint somebody on the feet. I thought that the Vitor Miranda fight was a step up for him.
Yeah, that was a big step forward, definitely.
Yeah, and he looked pretty sharp. He looked most of all, he looked very composed. Like he
he'd recently moved to King's MMA, and he looked like a guy who had moved to King's MMA.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, that like there's not a ton of variety there, but he was confident in using what he had on the feet. So yeah, he looked pretty good. I'm still curious about the wrestling matchup here against Omari Akhmedov, because Marvin Vettori still doesn't look to me like a very good takedown artist. And I'm not sure that he can just throw left hands over and over and outstrike Omari Akhmedov. You know, like Akhmedov is as we saw in the Al-Razak Al-Hassan fight, that he is at least he shows the signs of an experienced veteran. Yeah. You know, like it's difficult to just catch him with the same shit over and over and over again. You can flummox him. You can take advantage of the fact that he starts to gas, but you're not just going to throw one shot and catch him over and over and over unless you get lucky early. He will adapt and adjust because he's seen a lot of shit over the course of his career.
Yep.
And he is, in this matchup, I believe, the better takedown artist. Akhmedov has a well-timed and powerful shot, and he's not a great control grappler, so that could put him in a difficult position if Vettori looks to counter those shots with guillotines, if he looks to scramble and set up whatever other submissions. Guillotine seems to kind of be his thing. But Akhmedov may have the wrestling advantage to allow him to control Vettori down the stretch. I do think that if Vettori... I have a lot of faith in Rafael Cordero's ability to rapidly improve grapplers in terms of their striking. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Vettori is going to come in here looking yet more comfortable and more confident on the feet and a little more fluid and diverse. And if he can do that, then all he really needs to do is not get taken down too much and keep the pace up for 3 rounds. Pretty much anybody who can do that against Akhmedov has a fairly good chance of beating him, at least in the 3rd round, because he tends to slow down every single time. So I'm going to take Vettori, but I think it's going to be a good fight. I think this is a really nice matchup.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple things here that I want to add a little bit to, and I think one of the big things for me is Vettori's takedown defense, which is really quite good, and he's very hard to keep down there as well. I mean, he's somebody that Antonio Carlos Jr. basically ended up having to wall install just because he couldn't get him down and keep him down.
Yeah, good point. And I also didn't mention that, like, while Akhmedov has the better shot, he's also not very good at stopping takedowns himself.
Yeah, he's not very good defensively, and he's just not very controlling, especially not against somebody who's more experienced than Abdulrazak Al-Hassan, who just has mile-wide gaps in his game beyond a right hand and a right kick and a right knee and a, like... I'm sure if he could headbutt people, he would only headbutt them with his right temple.
God, boy, thank God nobody ever made the mistake of telling like Oluwale Bongboj that headbutting was allowed, because that man would have done nothing but headbutt people. Just the sort of that fits perfectly into that sort of wild athlete style.
Oh man,
flying headbutt, Superman headbutt.
The other thing here is that I think this is something, and it's a little hard to tell with Akhmedov, but one of the things we saw in the Abdulrazak Al-Hassan fight, and albeit Al-Hassan hits like a truck, is that Akhmedov was very willing to cede ground in that fight, to let himself be pressured and move back to the fence and then rely on flurrying off the fence to take over. And Vettori, his style, I think the style he's building with Kings is one entirely built on providing pressure.
Yeah, so it's not just something that he did against Al-Hassan. It's something Akhmedov has done in many fights.
Yeah, so if Vettori is going to be set on moving forward, I don't think Akhmedov can win this fight moving backward and shooting off the cage. And especially, this is, a little fuzzier math as well. I understand that, but I was looking at fight metric for Akhmedov and Vettori, and they have a pretty similar amount of strikes landed per minute. Like Akhmedov is at 2.94 and Vettori is at 3.13. But Vettori's accuracy is only 44%, and Akhmedov's is 34%. Vettori's accuracy is Akhmedov's is 34% and Vettori's is 44%. And I think a lot of that is because Akhmedov tends to do most of his striking in wild bursts. Like his offensive, the thing that makes up his numbers offensively are that not that he's actually really a high volume striker. It's that he will occasionally just like sit down and throw 10 strikes.
Yeah.
And they are wild and unstructured and not that many of them land.
Yeah, even in just the one like striking heavy performance we've seen from Marvin Vettori against Vitor Miranda, he was like picking his shots. Akhmedov is more of a clubber.
Yeah, and Vettori seems like he's much more able to just set a consistent pace over rounds, and I think all that combined has me picking him here. That Akhmedov, for all of his power and his offensive potency in moments, has generally not been a very potent offensive force in the octagon. And so I'm going to pick Vettori here to just sort of take over and pick away for a unanimous decision of 3 rounds of pressure offense. Maybe even knock him out. Akhmedov has been knocked out twice now by Sergio Moraes and Eliezer Zaleski. So
yeah, he's been looking a little chinny lately.
Odds on that fight. Omari Akhmedov is the underdog, opening at plus 185, adjusting up to plus 199 or so. And moving down, a brief spike, but moving back down to plus 180. And Vettori is the favorite, opening at minus 265 and moving steadily up to minus 224. I think that's a little wide. Vettori still has something more to prove, and Akhmedov has been a pretty reasonable vet, but I like seeing Vettori as the favorite there. All right. Next up on the card, Myles Jury, Rick Glenn. And this is a great fight. It's a great fight, especially because I really don't know what the hell's going on with Myles Jury.
Mm-hmm.
On paper, I think Myles Jury should absolutely win this fight. Rick Glenn is I know you like him, and I gotta admit, like, watching what he did to Gavin Tucker was pretty cool. But it also feels like Rick Glenn is a somewhat limited move forward brawler who's mostly just tough as shit and has endless cardio, and if you're not prepared for that, then he's a huge problem. And if you are, I don't know that he's necessarily going to be among any division's elite. He's not a great athlete. He's really quite slow.
You and Pat are the same. All of you people are the same. You're like, I like a fighter, and Pat at least likes Rick Glenn too. But typically the argument is something along the lines of, well, I know you like him, but really he's not elite.
I'm not have to be elite for me to like him that aren't elite. It's not that. It's just that it's hard for me.
You have to be one of the 5 best dudes in the division to still have a style that works.
No, I know. I'm just, for me, it feels like Rick Glenn is he's almost kind of an intelligence test that Gavin Tucker failed massively.
For sure.
Like, there's a point, like, it only got, that was one of those fights where I picked Tucker, and I got about 30 seconds into watching it, I'm like, oh my God.
Ooh, he's going to lose.
He's going to lose.
Yeah. There's no doubt that, like, Tucker's lack of discipline had as much to do with how that fight went as Glenn's effective offense.
Yeah. And because otherwise, like, I look at Rick Glenn's fight with Evan Dunham, and it was a cool fight, and it was competitive. But, or even his fight with Philippe Nover, which was, a better performance against a worse fighter. But, you see things like Rick Glenn just doesn't stuff takedowns at all. And I know Evan Dunham is a pretty good takedown artist, but, like, he's got, Evan Dunham shot in, turned a corner, and Glenn just folded. And he does not, like, he's very much there to be hit. He doesn't have the ability or the speed to kind of work around fighters who can pick their shots.
That is where I thought we saw some actual improvement in the Tucker fight.
Yeah.
Where Glenn was actually decidedly difficult to catch. He was moving his head a lot better.
True.
Maintaining his distance a lot better. I don't know. I think
the big thing here for me, though, is it's mostly the wrestling. Because I think Jury is he's one of those strikers. He's a little bit like Nicolau to me, where it's like, given any particular punch or kick from Myles Jury, and it's like, oh, that's pretty. And then you kind of wait for more to happen or more to be involved in his offensive game, and you're like, really? Is it just, it's the reason that in a fight like Donald Cerrone fight, he just got his ass kicked, quite literally. But I think the big thing is that Jury is really a slick offensive wrestler and grappler. And I think he can pot shot his way, pot shot on the feet against Glenn in ways that will keep him in the fight and keep him from getting hit too much, and then hit takedowns and outwork Glenn on the mat. I think he'll get too much top control time and the ability to move around and find control positions. But this is also just a question of where the fuck Myles Jury is, because he looked great against Mike De La Torre earlier this year, but that was his first fight in 2 years after getting tapped by Charles Oliveira and absolutely whipped by Don Cerrone. And there's kind of a feeling that he's just, after.
And let's be honest, like knocking out Mike De La Torre in the first round.
Yeah.
Not a huge achievement.
No. And there's just kind of a feeling that like maybe, he moved camp a while ago to Power MMA, and it just kind of doesn't, I don't know. Like, he was one of those dudes that the UFC hunted for a while through Tough and all that, and just
his momentum just evaporated.
Yeah.
It just feels like he's going nowhere, and we have no idea now. He's been going nowhere for so long now, we don't know where he could go anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm picking him, but obviously if for any reason he's just not in this fight at all, then Glenn is going to march forward unstoppably and just, look for clinch offense and short combinations and just this sort of Terminator-esque style of fighting.
Terminator-esque is a good way to describe it. There's definitely this thing I just noticed in Fight Metric. Jury is having good, smooth offensive wrestling is something, but he's lucky that Glenn's not a better takedown artist, because apparently he has 0% takedown defense. Jury has never stopped a takedown in the UFC. And I was like, is it one of those weird cases where nobody's shot in him? But no. Ramsey Nijim got him down. Donald Cerrone got him down. Charles Oliveira got him down. I mean, these are all relatively decent takedown artists, but still, he's never stopped a takedown attempted on him. It's kind of interesting.
It is weird.
Isn't that strange? He's got a fairly lengthy UFC career, too.
And somebody else, I'm just seeing something that somebody's saying that Rick Glenn has a very good takedown defense according to Fight Metric, which, it's
Fight
80%.
Metric has like 80%.
But it's over 3 fights, and in the Evan Dunham fight.
Yeah. That only accounts for a few fights, most of which he was not being shot on very well or very often. I will say, in Glenn's defense, the Evan Dunham fight, if I recall correctly, was short notice.
Yeah.
Pretty damn short notice. Like, I think it was like a week before. So that was a rare Rick Glenn fight in which he tired out long before his opponent did and had to kind of gut out the last half of the bout.
Yeah. He got taken down 3 of 9 times in that fight. And then the Philip Nover fight, well, of course it's 80. Philip Nover went for 2 takedowns, which, whatever. And then the Gavin Tucker fight, that's really going to skew the shit out of this.
Yeah. A bunch of desperate, sloppy shots.
Yeah, he went 0 for 4, so that doesn't actually say as much to me.
Yeah. No, Glenn's takedown defense is not the best part of his game. I don't think he's bad there. I think
he's got a good first-level takedown defense. That's what I saw against Evan Dunham, is that he would, get the initial positioning, and then Dunham just moved, and he just fell pretty quickly.
His problem there is that he's kind of a reverse Louis Smolka, where, he does have fluidity without speed on the feet, but he has neither once it gets into a scramble, really. He can't keep up with good takedown artists athletically, and I think that might be an issue for him against Jury. But I also don't know where Jury's at, and I know that Glenn can throw a lot more than Jury.
Yeah.
And I also know that if Glenn does defend a takedown, he's actually pretty brutal on the ground. Glenn in top position is ferocious. He uses his frame very well to land postured up punches and elbows. He's got a fairly good guard passing game. He's just a nice mixture of pressure passer and aggressive half guard striker. And he's also extremely good in the clinch. It happens to be one of his strongest phases. So he does have options here. The question is, can Myles Jury do some of the frustrating stuff that Philippe Nover did? Can he run Glenn around? Can he avoid engagements?
Yeah.
And can he still win the fight while doing that? Because Glenn definitely doesn't have the foot speed, and he may have still made improvements, but at least when he fought Nover, he didn't really have the footwork to cut off the cage and maintain that pressure. keep his target in front of him. That could be an issue here against Jury, but I don't know. I think Glenn's pace is going to get to Jury. I actually think that Glenn is going to find opportunities. Even if Jury gets a takedown, I don't think it's going to be like the Dunham fight where Glenn starts to slow down as a result of a few bad takedowns early or a few missed opportunities to sprawl early on in the fight. And if Jury does start to slow down or starts to feel the pressure as he has against other opponents, like against Donald Cerrone, if Glenn is able to push him into the clinch to keep him in front of him rather than having to chase him around everywhere. If Glenn is able to stuff a takedown and get on top position, I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunities for Glenn to push that pace that makes him so dangerous.
There is just a dash of Philip Noverness in Myles Jury.
Yes. Yeah, there's a dash of Philip Noverness in him. Yeah, absolutely.
You're like, oh yeah, you look like a really great, amazing athlete on paper, and I can understand how people get super excited about watching a few highlights of yours. And then in a fight, sometimes it's just sort of this weird, aimless thing.
Yeah, it just doesn't, for some reason, the sum is less, the whole is less than the sum of its parts in some weird ways.
Yeah, Jury has had a lot more consistent success in the UFC doing against much better opposition than Philip Nover, for the large part, except for that. Wait, was it? Damn it, who did Philip Nover beat that was just depressing for everyone? No, he lost to Henan Barao. Never mind.
That's the problem with Philip Noverness. You can't even, it leaches right out of the mind as soon as you've. Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely Myles Jury. Like, I mean, goddamn, the man beat Michael Johnson and Ramsey Nijem early on. But there's some weird inconsistency with Myles Jury that just makes it hard for me to trust him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And that's the thing with Rick Glenn. You can say he's an intelligence test, but I definitely trust him to do the Rick Glenn thing.
That's what intelligent test fighters are, is they have a set way they fight, and they always come in fighting that way, and it's up to you to...
I used to call guys like Rick Glenn like a matchmaker's dream. Like Rick Glenn in particular, because he's exciting to watch, but a matchmaker can be reasonably sure what they're going to get out of Glenn, and so they can kind of gauge what a matchup is going to look like. And that's harder to do with Jury. So I'm going with Glenn.
Of course you are. You're Marc.
Boy, Rick Glenn. I hope he has that mustache again. You know what I'm saying?
I hope so too. Dude looked like a logger on a diet.
Like a starving lumberjack.
Yeah, he had actually no, it was a perfect trucker body. Yeah. The pot belly. It's like the trucker without the pot belly, but the like super weird skinny, like slightly unhealthy looking lifestyle.
Yeah. That one inexplicably scrawny construction worker on the crew.
That's right. That's right. Smokes like 3 packs a day. All right.
This reverse racism. We're just calling Rick Glenn like a lunch pail white dude, basically. He looked excessively blue collar in this fight.
Oh God, he did. Glenn is the underdog, opened at plus 220, has fallen steadily to plus 184. Jury, the favorite, opened at minus 300, has risen steadily, jumped up just recently to minus 227. And honestly, I think that's still a little wide. Jury's, there's a certain unknownness about him.
Yeah, I agree.
And that brings us to the final prelim: Khalil Rountree versus Michal Oleksiejczuk.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of ways this one could go, but I think Khalil Rountree is going to kill Michal Oleksiejczuk in the first minute because the man is incredible. We talked about
how Michal Oleksiejczuk fights before he was supposed to fight Ion Kudalava.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he is exceedingly hittable early. The one thing I did notice now, having like reviewed some of his footage a little more, is that you can't be predictable. Right, yeah. Like that, he does get reads on like if he doesn't get knocked out by the first 8 straight right hands that he eats straight on the chin, then he will slip the next 8. You know, like or he'll get his head out of the way. You have to keep things mixed up. You have to change your rhythm and change the patterns of your attacks. But Khalil Rountree is like an insanely explosive, fast person who seems to actually be putting together a much more layered striking game We've seen little glimpses of that here and there. I think there's definitely a chance that Rountree could get tired and wilt and lose this fight down the stretch, but he's a particularly dangerous fighter to be that hittable against early. So I think he's going to knock Oleksiejczuk out in the first.
Yeah, Oleksiejczuk seems like the kind of fighter who, if a really technical, good, thoughtful coach could get their hands on him, they could iron out a lot of his flaws in a hurry because he's so confident about his ability to stay in the pocket and his ability to return fire.
He's got power. He's pretty accurate with his hands. Like he will throw some interesting combinations and find the target with like 2 or 3 punches in a row that his opponents don't see coming. He just doesn't seem to have a defensive repertoire.
No, and I don't know where he's training, he's likely to get it. It just, he's the product of a very specific school. It's very obviously like the product of a very specific training regimen, Yeah.
And
if that could be changed just a little, throw him into, where it'd be like Ludwig. That would be like the solution. Somebody who would just put a couple of quick layers of trickier footwork and offensive and like movement into that
sounds
game.
Like a great fit.
Without that, though, I got to pick Rountree too. Honestly, there's not a lot to add. Oleksiejczuk, it really just does march forward and get hit a ton, and then wins because people get so tired of whipping his ass in the first minute or two of a fight that they burn all their gas tank, and he just rallies back and beats them.
And I think, again, like in review, a little of that has to do with level of competition and the fact that once he does do a little adjusting, where at least he'll stay out of range to get hit with the same shit, but he's been fighting guys who can't really adjust back.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking like obvious, juiced up BJJ grapplers who are just whomping on him standing. And you're just like, this is not okay. And then they immediately gas out, and then he knocks them out. But
he's got power. I mean, I give him that. But he is a comically hittable fighter.
Oleksiejczuk is a reasonable underdog here. Opened at plus 180, adjusted to plus 224, and has moved up and down a little, but is at plus 241 now. Khalil Rountree opened at minus 260, adjusted down to minus 283, and has adjusted up and down a little, is at minus 300 now. I think that's honestly a little close to me. Like, that smacks to me of just like people looking at Oleksiejczuk's record and being like, oh, he's unbeaten. So
yeah, I mean,
Rountree,
it does still feel kind of like there's a narrow window in which Rountree feels almost guaranteed to knock Oleksiejczuk out, and after that, the matchup does probably gets more competitive as Oleksiejczuk sort of realizes that his chin is still attached to his face and that he can continue throwing punches back. But that early window is wide open,
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm okay with those odds, but this is also why I'm not good at betting. So
yeah, I don't bet either. Neither of us gamble. Well, you gamble. You're just bad at it. I don't gamble because I know I would be bad at it. But we like the odds because they're a good barometer of public perception. And that's really it. The reason that we use them and talk about them and talk about things feeling closer than that or further apart than that is that, just the perception of this being like a reasonably winnable fight, or this person having a better shot statistically than that person, these things like that. I find that all useful and interesting in MMA analysis. Seeing things like Smolka being a huge underdog to Matheus Nicolau, or not huge, but like a sizable underdog, things like that. All right. What did I do? I feel like I bumped myself out of my own. There we go.
Onto the main card, right?
Yeah, onto the main card now. Welterweight bout. Carlos Condit, Neil Magny. Like this fight a lot. I don't think it's the best use of Carlos Condit in terms of his name value and interests.
That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, is this really, you know what I mean? Like,
that's
you got a guy who's declining. Like, what are you going to do with Donald Cerrone? I know, put him in a main event against
Yancy Medeiros.
Right. Like,
yeah.
You know, I guess they got something out of him giving him to Darren Till. But that was unexpected. Like, they expected Cerrone to beat Till, and now they're like, okay, well, he might be on the downslide. Let's give him. And Yancy Medeiros is not really like a tune-up.
No.
But he's also not a fight that means anything. So it's that kind of shit, like this.
That is true, because Neil Magny, at this point, just does not look like a welterweight contender. And fighting Carlos Condit is just kind of like it's a fun fight. It's a well-booked fight for Carlos Condit and a well-booked fight for Neil Magny. But the goal would be for Carlos Condit to win and then get a better fight like Robbie Lawler.
Yeah, or to, you know, like, depending on how the UFC wants to use him, and I know it is very inhumane and they are using their fighters, but to feed him to somebody they do expect to be a big contender, you know?
Yeah, to
Carlos
have him
Condit
fight
versus
Darren Till now.
Yeah, or Kamaru Usman or like someone like that, and give someone a win that vaults them into contention because of Carlos Condit's name.
Yeah. Still, I'm just excited to see Carlos Condit fight, and
I'm fearful but hopeful.
I'm fearful but hopeful. I think I'm gonna pick Carlos Condit here, and if it were any other top flight welterweight other than Neil Magny, I probably wouldn't. But Carlos Condit's chin has still held up, even though he's been getting rocked a bit. It's certainly still held up to date over the years better than Neil Magny's, who has, who got lit the hell up by Lorenz Larkin.
Mm.
And otherwise, the path to victory for Magny just doesn't make sense if he doesn't knock Carlos Condit out. Because Magny is not a bad wrestler, and Carlos Condit's takedown defense is god-awful. But Carlos Condit is hard to take down and hold down and get offense going against him. His guard is very active, and Neil Magny has been very submittable over the years. And I don't necessarily think that Magny can just get Carlos Condit down and work a top game on him for 3 rounds. Maybe he can.
Maybe. What's the last submission Carlos Condit got?
What?
Who was the last person Carlos Condit submitted? It was Carlo Prater in 2008.
Yeah, there's that.
I mean, there's a reason I think that around the time of the Johnny Hendricks fight, Carlos Condit was like visibly investing more in learning to wrestle off of his back, because it was like the guard alone was not catching people anymore.
Yeah, but it's also a question of like who are the fighters that have held Carlos Condit down and kept him down? And you basically have Johnny Hendricks, and then you have Damian Maia submitting him.
Rory McDonald.
Rory McDonald?
Rory McDonald held him down for portions.
Carlos Condit? Oh, yeah. But he didn't beat Carlos Condit.
No, he didn't. But he got some top control on him.
He got some top control, but
you're saying who held him down for 3 rounds to beat him like that?
Yeah. And you basically have Johnny Hendricks.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I don't think Neil Magny's that good a wrestler. In fact, we saw Neil Magny fight Johnny Hendricks, and he wasn't that good a wrestler. And if Neil Magny isn't going to knock Condit out on standing, then he's just a less high volume, more predictable striker.
Yeah.
Like, that's the big problem with Neil Magny's striking over the years, has just been that, like, he has this, like, triple jab thing that everything has to work behind, and it is really, people key off on it.
Yeah, you know how like in like the first round of a fight, you're usually looking for like a fighter with a good jab to establish their jab. I've been waiting like 10 fights for Neil Magny to establish his jab.
Yeah,
it'd be so much better if he would just snap that fucking jab off like once in the first round of every fight. Just sting the guy with it so he has to respect it.
Instead of this sort of rotating, like, hitting the speed bag thing.
You have such long arms. Just crack the dude in his nose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And so that's why I'm picking Carlos Condit. He could knock Carlos Condit out. Maybe he'll be the second dude to hold Condit down and just, work him over for 3 rounds. But I don't really bet on Neil Magny to be that guy. And otherwise, I have to pick Condit. He just, he works at a better pace. He works with more variety. And he's less predictable.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. My fears in this matchup are really more about where is Carlos Condit at right now.
Yeah.
Because it's, he was already talking about retiring before the Damian Maia fight. That fight did not go at all the way he wanted, of course. He got almost instantly submitted by Damian Maia. No shame in that, but the fact that he did talk about how Damian Maia was hurting him with strikes on the ground and how that felt weird even to him. Like he was noticing that something was different with his body. Those are the kind of symptoms that I'm like, what if Carlos Condit comes out and like he doesn't look confident or he can't let his shots go? Like, what if Carlos Condit comes out and can't throw his usual volume? Then I think Neil Magny could take him down and control him.
Well, yeah, I mean, if Carlos Condit just can't fight, then sure, yeah, he can. It's Neil Magny.
He can't fight. Like he'll still have his skills, but like this is a thing that tends to happen to like old fighters when they start to get shot more, and they have a harder time pulling the trigger. They have a harder time like. They might see the shit coming, but they can't react to it. Like the body just won't do what they want it to do. And it leaves them in this like Moraga against Nicolau, like this horrible conundrum of like, how do I move forward in this fight? I have my game plan in mind. It's not like when we normally ask, what is your plan to win right now? That's the shitty part. Carlos Condit will almost certainly have a plan to win in mind, but I fear that he won't be able to execute.
And for me, I guess that fear's been assuaged slightly because, I mean, the Damian Maia loss, like, that's 2 minutes of fight. He just got taken down because his takedown defense is terrible, and he got submitted because Damian Maia is a much, much better grappler.
Yeah.
And then before that, he had the Robbie Lawler fight. And I realized that Robbie Lawler is maybe also in a similar situation. We're seeing a decline. But would I pick Neil Magny over Robbie Lawler right now? No.
But
like that is a highly
much did the Robbie Lawler fight take out of Carlos Condit? How many of those
we don't know? We can't. Yeah. I can't.
That's why,
given the Damian Maia fight is my only data point sense.
Yes, from a predictive analytical perspective, I'm picking Carlos Condit, same as you. I just wanted to express my worries that.
Oh, I know. I don't.
It's going to be real sad.
Carlos Condit lose to Neil Magny because I feel like since the Lorenz Larkin loss, the Rafael dos Anjos fight was sort of the next time for Neil Magny to assert himself as like, no, actually, I could still be a top contender in this division. And RDA is just like, nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice dream, kid. Just a leg kick and then an arm triangle choke. We're done here.
It was very much like Damian Maia beating Carlos Condit. Like, I didn't even get a chance to try anything.
Yeah.
Like, what a heartbreaker.
Yeah. So I'm picking Condit, but yes, if Condit loses, it'll likely be a little sad. Condit is the favorite, not a huge favorite, but he opened at -150, dropped to -211, has slowly risen back up since to -166. And Magny opened at +110, jumped up to +169, and has slowly drifted back down to +139. I'm fine with those odds, Condit being a slight favorite, not a big favorite, because, yeah, the questions loom large at this stage in his career.
Yeah.
And it would really suck to see a fighter like Condit get into that Josh Berkman territory.
Yes. That's the thing, man. That's why I get so preemptively sad. The mere thought of the natural-born killer no longer looking like a killer is
because that's the thing with Josh, guys like who go the Josh Berkman route, is that I think is almost one of the like hardest to retire from stages, because they very clearly think they still have all the tools to keep going. Like, they physically look fast, they look strong, they look capable, and like they should be still the fighter they have always been. And they probably can like feel like that guy in the gym every day. And then they get into a fight and they just cannot pull the trigger on anything at all. So I hope that is not what is about to happen to Carlos Condit, because that would be super sad.
Me too. That's why, even though there's nothing to suggest yet, nothing really to suggest that that will happen, I spent so much time talking about it because I am worried about it.
All right, that brings us to a women's strawweight bout: Carla Esparza versus Cynthia Calvillo.
And this is me.
It is.
Well, Cynthia Calvillo's had a very good year in the UFC. Seemingly came out of nowhere after a very short, like 3-fight record or whatever outside the UFC. Came right in and has now run through 3 fighters. Didn't quite run through Joanne Calderwood, but I still think she showed some considerable growth in that fight. And
she's getting an amazing set of matchups that are perfect to like showcase her talents.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that it's I would never even say that's intentional on the UFC's part, because they're usually not nearly good enough at that. And you know, they have fighters they've invested a lot more in than Cynthia Calvillo that they've handled a lot more poorly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It probably has something to do with like the limited roster in this division as well. That there's just a better chance of getting a matchup that works for you in the top rankings. You know, the Calderwood fight, Calvillo did not run away with it, but she still looked pretty good. Like I would say that one at least was the first big test matchup she's faced, where it was like somebody she wasn't expected from the outset to beat, that they was expected to be competitive. And I thought she handled herself quite well. She used her footwork really nicely. She's continues to show a little more depth with her boxing. And as a wrestler and scrambler, she is pretty phenomenal. Like she's really talented. It seems to be really like gifted in that regard. It's just something she gets. And I don't know. It's hard to know where Carla Esparza is at here. In thinking about this matchup, the words of our friend, our depressed us buddy, Phil McKenzie, have been ringing in my ears. He's talked about how Carla Esparza is like suffering from the fact that she's finally trying to become more well-rounded. Now at this point in her career where like it's probably past the point where she's going to get the full rewards out of that change, despite the fact that her striking is looking better and she's using some head movement and she's timing counters, the kind of stuff she never used to do. She never used to be that comfortable in the pocket. Despite that, it's like her whole game is kind of reducing in effectiveness along with that. And I don't know, against Cynthia Calvillo, like I think it might be wise for Carla Esparza to do what no one else has done to Cynthia Calvillo and like really make her feel some wrestling pressure. Do the thing that Carla Esparza does better than almost anyone else in this division, which is hit takedowns and chain them together and force somebody to constantly defend. Pat and I were talking about this in Heavy Hands, but he suggested that Esparza might want to just rinse and repeat takedowns against Calvillo. Like, just get her down, back off, get her down again, and test her resolve, test her inexperience a little bit. See how she reacts to some serious pressure. Because part of the reason that Calvillo looked good, excuse me, in the Calderwood fight is that Calderwood was not able to pressure her.
Yeah, it was actually it more than anything, it was kind of a disappointing performance from Calderwood, who just looked really unwilling to pull the trigger at any time.
Yeah. You would have expected her, especially with her kicking game, to have more, but she was not able to. She didn't seem like she ever felt like she had Calvillo in front of her in her sights where she wanted her. And Esparza doesn't have anything better in the striking department than Calderwood there. But with the wrestling, she could keep that pressure on. As long as she could get her hands on Calvillo, she could keep that pressure on and make her work. And I'm no longer confident that she'll do that. And if she tries to do a lot of boxing and counterpunching with Calvillo, I think she's going to allow Calvillo to find ways to beat her. If she's not just forcing her to defend over and over and over, then Calvillo is going to have the energy to do the crazy things she does in scrambles. And she's going to have the energy to continue popping off that nice dipping jab of hers at range and showing what is still is an improving striking game. I don't expect her to be anything less than competitive on the feet with Esparza. And unless Esparza is going ham on takedowns, I think Calvillo is going to be able to eventually outwork her on the ground. So I'm going with Calvillo, but Esparza's in it.
This is a tough one because that Randa Marcos loss is still a little iffy. Like, I went back and watched some of that fight, and I'm like, did Esparza really lose this fight?
Oh, I scored that for her, especially because a lot of Marcos's best shots were to the back of the head. So I scored that for Esparza. It was close, but
yeah, but that would make Carla Esparza's only other recent loss to Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yep.
I think this might be a case of the newly implemented don't try to outdo the OG, where Cynthia Calvillo is going up against the old version of the older, more practiced version of herself.
Yeah, and no, they definitely could be.
Because I think the biggest thing for me here, this was what I saw that is worrying me a little bit, was how indecisive Calvillo looked about getting Joanne Calderwood to the ground in that fight. Like, there was like late takedowns, especially early in the fight, that kind of sealed rounds, and she got close on some, when she got to the ground, she did well to move to submission positions. But there were a lot of opportunities where she just kind of shot in and then bailed on the shot almost immediately, and she just did not look like she was dedicated to following through on it. And it happened against Pearl Gonzalez as well.
See, I kind of read those as she wanted to try to work on her striking.
It could be.
I kind of read it as her not fully committing to shots and maybe thinking they were going to set up things on the feet, and that maybe being an inexperienced striker, she didn't quite realize how close the Calderwood fight was in particular.
But that's kind of my point, is that when you're creating those kinds of issues in your own game yourself, and because you're inexperienced, you don't necessarily know what you're giving away by doing it. You don't necessarily you're not necessarily you're tricking yourself into a worse fight. And it's tough because so much of what Esparza does, like her striking, there's so many key eyes, and just like she always enters her striking combinations in the same rhythm. It's the biggest thing, is that she does, it's kind of like the Ray Borg thing, where as much improved as Ray Borg is when he was going to fight Demetrius Johnson, I was like watching the warm-up to that fight, and it's like, yeah, you're sitting outside and you think you're tricking everybody by feinting them, and then you're doing that for like 20 seconds, and the person's just like checking their fucking watch, and they're like, I know the moment you move towards me, I know that you're going to be striking with me now. I don't have to guess anymore. And Esparza has some of that. She definitely has this
whenever we describe someone as being mechanical or stiff, that's often what we're talking about. They just don't have the ability to rapidly change tempo, to just keep things interesting with their strikes. Even if they can throw different combinations, they all seem to come at the same speed, at the same one after the other. It's a nice steady beat. And no matter how fast the beat is, if it's steady, a good fighter can still time it. If it's predictable, a good fighter can time speed.
I just don't think
Esparza doesn't have speed.
No, I just don't think Calvillo's game is quite deep enough on the feet, though, if Esparza is dedicated even to just rote marching forward with boxing, jumping into the pocket with quick combinations, I don't think Calvillo is varied enough or technically deep enough to fight that off yet. And then I'll be really interested to see who wins the scrambling battle. Maybe it'll be Calvillo, but I kind of have the feeling this is going to be the first knockback for her. And it's going to be against somebody who has already played this game, who has already been this fighter for a while. So I'm going to lean Esparza here to be just a little bit busier standing and then to get the better positional moments on the ground that don't account for much offense either way for either woman, and that she ends up just squeaking out a very narrow decision.
I'm definitely in for the upset if it happens, because I have Carla Esparza doesn't get the goddamn respect she deserves, and I've been a fan of hers for years now, so I would love to see her be the one to upset Cynthia Calvillo. Yeah, I think she could,
because like
it's going to be close.
That Joanne Calderwood fight, so much of that was just neither woman being that effective standing. Calderwood because she was too worried about getting taken down, and Calvillo just because she's too raw.
Yeah,
and then
I will say before. Oh, go on.
And then the actual like grappling offense when it happened, like Calvillo had some good moments when it happened, but she didn't take over the fight doing that in what was a very close fight, nearly to the extent that you would have expected. And so I'm just not. And she didn't do that against Pearl Gonzalez either. I realize she subbed Gonzalez, but Gonzalez is also like the lowest level of fighter on that roster. I mean, she and Angela Magny are gone, but Gonzalez is pretty low, like a really bad athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm interested. It'll be interesting too to see if Calvillo is more aggressive against somebody smaller than her, because Esparza is smaller than pretty much everybody.
Or just if Esparza does try to do a lot of striking, as she has been more lately, if the reach advantage comes in handy, even if Calvillo is not being more aggressive.
Yeah.
The big problem with Esparza is always that she's just very small.
Yep.
She's 5'1".
Yep.
You know, she's tiny.
Esparza is the underdog here, opened at plus 150, adjusted up to plus 240, and is now at plus 209. Calvillo is opened at minus 190, dropped down to minus 314, and is now at minus 259. So
feels
a lot of good, strong odds on Calvillo, whose best win to date is unquestionably Joanne Calderwood.
A split decision. Yeah, that feels quite wide to me. Like, I think these could be. I wouldn't mind if Calvillo were the favorite, but I think these could be fairly close to pick 'em odds, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Maybe in like the 150 range, 180 max, you know.
That brings us to a lightweight bout. Dan Hooker, Marc Diakiese. And I like this fight a lot. I like it because I really, like, I don't know. Diakiese, I hope that Drakkar Klose fight taught him a lesson. I hope that losing a fight taught him a lesson, that merely having a much tougher fight than he was supposed to did not teach him.
Yeah, because he had a few of those already.
Yeah, most of that lesson being that you actually do need to invest in the fundamentals of striking and not just be this crazy, exciting guy who does not have any connecting parts to his game at all. He's with the American Top Team now. I don't know how much he's with them, but that may help. There's a small part of me that feels like ATT is just kind of this massive, unspecifically focused gym that churns out, like, they can, they'll give you a good structure to your camp, but doesn't necessarily have any technical identity to it. So I don't know. It may be just kind of on him to improve and take from that what he can.
They tend to be like a good general. They seem like a good general prep and game planning camp. But it is hard to say, like, what do ATT fighters look like is a little harder to pin down.
So I'm not, I don't know necessarily how well he's going to come in more technically well-rounded. I'm also not sure how much that will matter against Dan Hooker. It might matter a lot. It might matter a little. Hooker's been in this weird place where he, previous to the UFC, he was this very he was a clinch Muay Thai styled striker who then had a good submission game, especially off his back. And like none of that worked for him in the UFC at all.
He doesn't look anything like that now.
Yeah, he beat Ian Entwistle with it, but in fights against Maximo Blanco, in fights against Yair Rodriguez, in fights against Jason Knight, he's continually had to realize that he's not strong enough to be a clinch fighter in the UFC, and that you can't play a guard grappling game. Like, you can't just be a guy who doesn't wrestle but grapples. And that has turned him into an outfighter, a guy who wants to stick at range and try and counter and pick his shots, or just even, not necessarily even counter, but try to be unpredictable with big single strikes. And he's not bad at it.
He's getting better at it.
He's getting better at it.
Like, he's been trying that he's been trying shades of that since the Yair Rodriguez fight.
Yeah, well, I mean, since the Hatsuki Hioki fight, even since that Maximo Blanco just beat him by out-muscling him and pushing him around.
Yeah.
The Hatsuki Hioki fight, he was getting tuned up by Hioki before he found that random head kick.
And counter to the typical logic, he seemed to really turn the corner when he left his big camp and went back to is he Australian or New Zealand?
New Zealand.
It went back to New Zealand and had his full camp there and came out against Ross Pearson and looked like a pretty good outfighter, like with a complete outfighter's game.
Thing is, he also got hit by a Ross Pearson a lot.
Yes. Especially the jab and the left hook. He could not get away from that.
And Marc Diakiese doesn't have really like a jab or left hook specifically.
No. But he's very fast and he hits very hard.
But he's very fast and he hits very hard. So if Dan Hooker is going to try and be this very select, pick just the right shot at just the right moment outfighter who lets himself get hit and tries to make the little adjustments, like that was eventually what he did in the Ross Pearson fight, is just make these minute adjustments of head movement to be just far enough out of Pearson's range to land that huge knee when the time came. Then that could just mean he just gets absolutely drilled by Marc Diakiese early. I'm going to pick Diakiese here just for being faster and more powerful, and to being a willing and dedicated power wrestler who can go after guys and take them down well. Like, he still doesn't have a lot of he doesn't have a lot of the intermediate skills of wrestling either, but he is a highly dedicated wrestler who, even against more technical wrestlers like Frankie Perez, can beat them just by being tougher and grittier and more willing to get in there and stay on positions. So I kind of feel like he can, Hooker's just not active enough or powerful enough to keep Diakiese off of him, and is too hittable to not get hit by something really hard early. If he can stop takedowns and if he can make this a drawn-out fight, then he could easily become the sniper that picks Diakiese off as the fight goes on. But I don't know. I don't think he's gonna do it.
Yeah, I mean, I also there's so many technique wise, there are so many openings for the kind of game that Dan Hooker wants to play against a fighter like Marc Diakiese. Like, he's what is Diakiese? What's his striking skill? You know what I mean? Like, what's the thing he does well? Like, he just bombs people on the feet, and at times it'll look like he remembers, oh yeah, we did that karate style right hand in class last week, and then he'll hit somebody with a perfect one of those. But then every other moment, it's just it's a complete grab bag of whatever feels right in the moment, with no real discipline to it. But Dan Hooker, like he's not very strong, and he has difficulty tying up with people. Like it seems like a lot to bank on him hitting a guillotine on Diakiese like he did against Marc because Diakiese is just so strong that he can get guillotined and just probably lift Dan Hooker up and flip him around so the choke is nullified. Yeah, the issue with Diakiese is that he's just a very effective wrestle grappler because he's so aggressive, he's so tireless, and he like you could ask questions about how good his wrestling technique is, but he will chain attempt after attempt after attempt together.
Yeah.
His relentlessness carries him far. And I think Dan Hooker's going to have a hard time dealing with that unless he can really just keep Diakiese away. The thing is like at a certain point, Diakiese's going to get frustrated, and he's probably just going to run after Dan Hooker, like literally just sprint after him. And I don't think that Dan Hooker is quite quick enough or agile enough to stop that. I think that before Diakiese loses his patience, Dan Hooker might look quite good, and Diakiese might have a very difficult time getting him to the fence to tie him up and get him down. But when he decides,
there's a strong argument that Ross Pearson won the first round against Dan Hooker.
Yeah, it was a close fight all the way.
Fighting Ross Pearson mode, which is Ross Pearson's least effective mode.
Yeah, and Dan Hooker is just, I mean, that comes down to hitability, I think, but also like even without that level of craft, I think at the moment that Diakiese decides I'm just going to run after him, once he gets hands on Dan Hooker, the fight is going to look very different, and I think it's going to become Diakiese's bout after that.
Yeah, all fair. Dan Hooker is the underdog here, opened at plus 170, dropped down to plus 146, and then has risen in the past few days to plus 157. Diakiese opened at minus 230, jumped up to minus 165, and has drifted down to minus 189. So I like that. I like Diakiese as a reasonable favorite. Sure. I think it's also reasonable after that Drakkar close fight so perfectly exposed the problems in his game for him to not be a massive favorite over reasonably well-schooled, long-tenured UFC talent.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And that brings us to the co-main event. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Edson Barboza.
Is this me?
That's you.
All right. I have been waiting for this particular matchup for what feels like a very long time now. I have, like since Khabib established himself as the wrestling force in the division, if not the UFC, I have been thinking like, who in this division can stop Khabib? Who can stop him from just getting his hands? Who is actually a tough fight for this guy in this division that just won't look the same way all of his other fights have looked? And Edson Barboza was one of the guys on that short list because he's got great footwork. He's extremely quick and agile. He is a underrated takedown defender. Like he's actually very, very difficult to out wrestle. Has really good Aldo-like instincts for disengaging when somebody gets their hands on him. And he is a very skillful kickboxer who adapts and learns as the fight goes on and figures out new ways of striking his opponents. The problem is that like Khabib Nurmagomedov has the most profoundly overwhelming wrestling and grappling games in the UFC that I can think of. Like nobody else gives you the same sense of inevitability of, once he gets his hands on this person, it's over. Like the fight is just, it's a completely different fight from that point on, no matter who he's fighting. And it does still feel like he's going to find those opportunities sometimes against Edson Barboza because Nurmagomedov is he's very, very adaptable in the midst of these weird wrestling, like these standing scrambles. I don't know what you'd really call them, but there's so many instances you can point to throughout his UFC career, like when he tried to hit a takedown in Rafael dos Anjos, and then he like went for a trip and that was blocked, and then he turned it into a hip throw, and he was in this really awkward position with bad leverage, but still finished the hip throw. He'll like catch somebody's foot when they kick him, like Michael Johnson did that. He got his foot and then he was off balance. He couldn't quite finish it, but he just ran after him as Johnson turned his back. Like, you know, the video that the BE Twitter posted yesterday of that savage little girl wrestling.
Yeah, I didn't actually watch the video, but I saw.
She did that's how, like, that's wrestlers' pressure that Khabib uses. Like, you might get out in the scramble, but you gave up your back, and I'm on my feet, so I'm just gonna stay right on top of you. I'm gonna be ready to push you over, to punch you, to trip your foot, like the way Daniel Cormier wrestled Dan Henderson when he just chased him down and got that foot sweep. And Khabib wrestles everyone that way. It does feel inescapable. The thing is that Khabib is also like not a very good striker. He's got some tricky offensive moves.
I would almost say that he's actually maybe been getting slightly worse as a striker.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that.
In part, probably because somebody's trying to make him a more technical striker, and so he's actually trying to focus on his form. And you kind of see that in fights where suddenly he's now like he's trying to think about the punches he's throwing rather than just firing off these loopy Sambo shots.
Yeah, where he did have like his strikes, like the weird uppercuts that he throws that set up his takedowns and lead him into the clinch. And there's definitely some logic to his moves, but I think you're right. Like the way he looked on the feet in the Michael Johnson fight or in the Daryl Horcher fight.
Yep.
Maybe some of it has to do with the fact that the man cannot have one fight without it being followed by a 9-year layoff. So he's just rusty every time he fights these days. But I think you're also right that he's like, he doesn't have that same like reckless ferocity that kind of embodied his striking earlier, where he's just, okay, I'm close enough, I'm going to leap in and land the shot, and it's going to set up another thing. And that plays into his strengths as a grappler and as a wrestler.
Yeah.
And without that, like, he's just kind of hittable.
Yeah. He gives people several minutes per fight of just getting to tee off on him.
Yeah, and I don't know, against somebody who moves as well as Edson Barboza. Like, Edson Barboza has the best defensive footwork and positioning of anyone Khabib has fought. He's the best mover he's fought yet. Yeah. And I don't know how sustainable it is to just like run after somebody and try to really force the wrestling exchanges if you can't get something going on the feet. You know what I mean? Like, Khabib is not going to be able to do to Barboza what I expect Diakiese to do to Dan Hooker. It's just not an option, I don't think, at this level. And while I don't think Edson can survive a prolonged beating on the ground the way Michael Johnson did, Edson certainly doesn't have Michael Johnson's chin. Like, as long as he's not just getting pinned in place, as long as it looks more like the RDA fight, where RDA was at least resisting and fighting back, then I don't know. I think Edson will be able to enjoy some sustained periods of striking in this matchup. And if he can, then I expect him to kind of get sharper and better as the fight goes on. Whereas I've had this pet theory in my head for some time now that Khabib's conditioning is not always as amazing as it seems. It's just that he's so relentless that his opponents always get tired before he does. Yeah. But that is definitely, that relies on the fact that relies on him heavily out wrestling his opponent.
It relies on control. He doesn't have to have, as long as he fights like his conditioning is great and he can control you, then his conditioning will always be better than yours.
Yeah. So it's going to be a very dicey fight. Like every single takedown attempt is going to have massive consequences for both guys. And Edson Barboza is not as powerful a striker as Michael Johnson. So he's not going, although it didn't really seem to have an effect on how Khabib fought, but he's probably going to have to go the distance fighting a very smart technical fight. But I'm going to pick him to do it. I think Edson Barboza beat Khabib. That's my pick.
You're picking Edson Barboza. Yeah, I can't do it.
And I understand.
I think probably the biggest reason I can't do it is that I think, and it doesn't, like, it's one of those weird things where Barboza hasn't had to pay for it recently just because of the competition he's been fighting. Specifically, it's like the competition he's fought lately, Beneil Dariush, Gilbert Melendez, Anthony Pettis, is very specifically geared for Edson Barboza. at an elite level, Edson Barboza. Melendez more so just because he's a bit washed now. But, Dariush really doesn't like to wrestle for as good a grappler as he is. He wants to be a pressure boxer. That is or kickboxer. That's what Beneil Dariush these days wants to be. Pettis, we know, just wants to be in a kickboxing fight. And they have let Barboza have the kind of rhythm of fight he likes, where he's transitioning. Because I think as a actual fundamental striker, I think Barboza he's not quite happy with what he has to do to fight the way he needs to win. Where you see him and he'll he wants to be the dude that sits down and scares you off with these big power shots.
Yeah.
But he knows he can't do that. So a lot of it is him just kind of skating around the outside, trying to pick his spots and be technical and all that, and then have these moments where he just sits down and wings these power punches that give him the respect and distance to reestablish that.
That's been sort of the pattern throughout his UFC career, which I think he has been struggling to overcome this impulse to just plant your feet and throw 3 predictable punches in a row when that's not what you are suited to as a physically or mentally as a fighter.
Yeah. And it has also meant that over his career, guys who can just pressure him and keep pressure on him have found ways to beat him.
Yeah.
Because he always wants to stand and plant and throw a couple of just predictable strikes. I mean, even Beneil Dariush was having a lot of good, strong success in his fight with Edson Barboza, just staying after him, moving forward, keeping pressure on him, making him pay when Barboza wanted to plant his feet. And I think there's just too much of that remains for him to not let Khabib get a hold of him. He's not going to hit him hard enough to really make him pay for how bad his striking is. And when he wants to, he's going to plant his feet and be right there in front of him to get grabbed. And his takedown defense is great, but that just doesn't matter that much against Khabib.
Yeah, I will say, I do think the one clear edge that Barboza has over a fighter like Michael Johnson is that Johnson's just kind of he's kind of I don't know, there's not as much depth to Johnson's game as I think you might be convinced that there is. He really surprises you with his speed and his quickness early, and then most people who fight Michael Johnson tend to do better against him with each successive round.
Yeah, it's a lack of depth and a lack of composure.
Yeah, and he kind of falls apart. And Barboza definitely has had issues with pressure fighters in the past, but
his composure has increased immensely. I mean, there's a reason that in that Dariush fight, having trouble with a pressure fighter, he just adjusted and knocked him the fuck out,
and watching it again, I was actually really impressed with how Barboza reacted to that first round, because it didn't go all the way he wanted. But when I first watched it, I remember my impression being, Barboza was just losing a fight and then came back with a knockout. But he was working towards that knockout throughout the second round. He definitely slowed down Dariush's shots. He found his openings, and Dariush showed him that jab dip feint once 10 seconds before actually going for the takedown. Barboza was on top of it. He saw Dariush go for that feint. He was like, motherfucker, you saw me do nothing, and now you think you've got me. Try it again and go for the shot this time. And I don't know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, Barboza's a smart fighter. There's no question for somebody who has to have that war in his head of what kind of guy do I want to be in here. He makes he has worked on it and adjusted, and he is a smart, high level fighter. Doing that. He's a championship caliber fighter.
I'm just praying for another flying knee so I don't have to be wrong.
Yeah. The other thing that I think this is something that just gets overlooked with Khabib a lot, which is weird, because he's such a technical wrestler and grappler, and he's got so much technique in how he chains his wrestling and how he positions his grappling, in how he locks down things. But you kind of alluded to this with how he just got way out of position on RDA and hit a hip throw.
Strong.
Not just strong. he is absolutely way up among the top elite pantheon of athletes in MMA.
Yeah.
In terms of speed and strength and endurance. Like, maybe his conditioning is not always on point, but it is very good. It is always very good.
A physical beast, for sure.
He is just a physical beast. And that's why his striking not being great has not cost him as terribly as it should.
Yeah.
Because he's faster than almost everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And he is stronger than almost everyone. And that, you know, that's...
And he's going to cut his prime short, and he probably should have been at 170 for the past couple years. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we're at the perfect crossroads here where Khabib is like, before anyone realizes he's slipping, he's slipped. And once again, everyone underestimates my favorite boy, Edson Barboza, but I'm worried about it, Zane. I shouldn't have made that pick. I already know it.
No, I mean, honestly, like, Edson Barboza, he has slowly, for a dude that got washed by Jamie Varner years ago, post the best parts of Jamie Varner's career, he has very slowly, consistently, with the same exact similar setbacks along the way, moved himself from fun action fighter to very top of the elite, top 5, really should fight for a title someday, action lightweight.
I say this with the utmost respect, and I mean this as a compliment. Edson Barboza is the Ryan Bader of the lightweight division.
Yeah.
And he's getting better in ways that people don't realize because he keeps losing, but he doesn't lose the same way twice. He's always learning from those losses. He's a smart fighter.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then, we've got our main event. Oh, wait, no, we've got our odds. Odds. Edson Barboza is the underdog. Opened at plus 180, has climbed steadily, and is at plus 230. Khabib Nurmagomedov opened at minus 260, has dropped steadily to minus 286. And that brings us to our main event, Cris Cyborg, Holly Holm. And I feel a little bad because, like, ahead of every single Cris Cyborg fight, and I mean literally every single Cris Cyborg fight, about 2 weeks out, everybody's just go, I think this is the one she loses. And I think I know how. And, like, this literally, like, Lena Landsberg, people were like, can Cris Cyborg deal with her clinch game? Is Leslie Smith the best fighter Cris Cyborg has fought in a long time? Is Tanya Evinger, can she get her down and out-wrestle her? No.
No, the answer's been no.
And Holly Holm, I'm starting to see it too. And people are like,
well, Holly Holm knocked out Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, Holly Holm is going to be the best fighter Cris Cyborg's ever faced. She is going to be, she's a elite striker. She's got that counter game that could pick Cris Cyborg off. I just don't see it. Like, the big thing is, you go back even against somebody like Tanya Evinger, and you watch what Cyborg was doing in that fight. And a lot of people, I remember watching that fight in the moment, and people were like, oh my God, Tanya Evinger is doing really well, and all that. And I think I was like live on play-by-play, and I was like, okay, 10-8 Cyborg round 1, 10-8 Cyborg round 2.
10-7. Oh, she knocked her out.
And, like, Evinger was doing well to survive, but she literally was winning zero seconds of that fight. Not minutes.
Perception is extremely relative when it comes to Cyborg because, like, honestly, surviving the first round, most people think you're doing well. Yeah.
And the big thing that kept Tanya Evinger in that fight as long as it did, and it's the thing that has me picking Cyborg so firmly here, is that it's the slow evolution of Cyborg from march forward brawler, and she was really like you watch, and her form as a lead fighter was never great. Like that was part of the reason I think a lot of times that Cyborg has kind of gotten like a lot of hate for her technical game. Is that you go back and you watch fights like her Jan Finney fight or some of those other ones where she was just marching forward, winging strikes. And you see somebody who is leading because they have all the confidence and all of the physicality to lead, but doesn't actually look technically comfortable leading and like marching and like throwing the first strike.
Even then, she was like obviously more comfortable on the counter.
Yeah. And so what she has slowly done over time is learned to be a pressure counter puncher. And that is the modern Cyborg as we see it, where in a fight with Tanya Evinger takes 3 rounds because Cyborg is comfortable to just sit back, wait for Evinger to throw something wild, and just bomb her for it. And Holly Holm, like that's the thing, is that Holly Holm is also most effective on the counter, but she's developed this whole fill the space and fill the time offensive lead strike game that just doesn't do much or go to anything. Like there's a question mark kick in there that's pretty tricky and obviously hard for people to see coming. But there's a reason we were talking about like her throwing a Rin Nakai front kick in like that fight against Betch Kohea. Like she will just throw stuff from 4 feet away just to fill space. And against better strikers who have been more who are able to sit on the counter, she just gives all sorts of opportunities. Mm-hmm. So that Valentina Shevchenko and Jermaine Durandamy can consistently outpoint her round to round.
And talking about someone who's less effective leading, like other than the left high kick, if Holly Holm can't get you like scurrying backwards, then she's really has a hard time leading. And it's at this level, it's hard to get you scurrying backwards because a fighter like Cyborg doesn't really have to respect most of what Holly Holm throws at her. Like little inside leg kicks, side kicks, like there's not a lot of power in any of that.
No.
And so even if it lands, like you could still counter it and be okay. And
exactly. And that's the thing, is that so much of the way Holly Holm strikes is just set up for Cyborg to march in with a straight right hand or an overhand right and just club her. And then maybe once she gets clubbed, Holly Holm will fire back some counters of her own, and she's got power to do it. She, when she has to sit in the pocket and when she gets hit and she has to fire back, that's when Holly Holm is often at her best as a boxer. But taking shots to land shots against Cris Cyborg is just not anybody's good idea.
Yeah, see, I thought the other reason you were going to say earlier, like the reason Tanya Evinger was able to do that, I thought you were going to say was her chin. And I think that her chin will also, Holly Holm's chin will also be responsible for some of her ability to withstand. Like she's going to have to rely on that famous durability a bit.
Yeah, because, and then Cyborg, maybe she won't be able to take her down. Jackson Wink fighters and Holly Holm, along with them, are very good at knowing how to break the clinch and circle back to space to keep themselves off their back. But, it really feels like unless Holly Holm just catches a very careful and very patient Cyborg out, then she's going to have to bet on getting into a firefight and getting the better of a firefight against Cris Cyborg.
Yep.
And No, I'm never going to call that for any woman.
Yeah, for literally any woman beating Cyborg. I think, I think Cyborg as a fighter is, I mean, she has matured a lot in her approach to the fight game over the last few years, and I think that she is far past the point of ever getting frustrated by just not being able to finish somebody. Like I think we saw that in the Tanya Evinger fight, that she'll dial it back and just reduce the pressure to a simmer and keep it on and keep hunting and pecking for openings. Just make sure the other person doesn't get back into the fight, but you don't have to go all out, and you don't have to like. At no point does she feel pressured to finish the fight now. I think she's past that point. She might still be frustratable if you just don't let her fight. And honestly, I think if I'm Holly Holm, that's what I do against Cyborg. Is
Yeah.
I don't even try to counter for the first couple rounds. I just stay just on the edge of range, and when she throws, I get the hell out of there. And then
Yep.
when we reset, I get the hell out of there, and I never, ever, ever engage. I make it an abysmally boring fight to watch, and I hope that Cyborg starts to make mistakes so that then I can catch her as she comes in.
It just doesn't seem like Cyborg's that kind of fighter anymore, you know?
Right. Like that's the thing is I think Cyborg, I feel confident Cyborg's past the first kind of frustration. I think she might be past that. Like she has the tools to adjust to that kind of game plan. And as we said, like what is Holly Holm going to be doing to rack up points and score damage while none of those engagements are happening? She's still going to be losing those portions of the fight because it might take just one solid leg kick from Cyborg to equal 5 of the little touching ones that Holly Holm throws. And yeah, we asked the question last week on the Depressed or maybe after the Depressed, we're like, does Cyborg have to pressure Holly Holm? Can she actually compete with her in a boxing match? And I think she probably can. Like, I think technically she can, as long as, unless it's the kind of fight in which Holly Holm is just evading, and not allowing any exchanges to take place. I think that's Holly's only real shot at victory here. Of course, there's always the slim chance head kick or straight left as Cyborg comes in, but Cyborg is a very well put together striker, and she doesn't tend to leave a lot of openings. She tends to work behind a jab. Much like Amanda Nunes, like she doesn't get enough credit for how good her footwork is. She pivots and turns really subtly and easily to find angles to continue raining down counters. She's just a very, very good kickboxer. By MMA standards and by any standards, really, she's very good. So, yeah, I think she's going to beat Holly Holm, and I think she might myrtleize her.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, even against Lena Landsberg and Evinger, who are much, much less polished strikers, that was a very patient, calculated, I'm going to take my time, I'm going to just, work on a very patient, slow, methodical game, and once I've broken you, then I'll just kill it, then I'll go in for the kill. But, that's going to get her past Holly Holm, too.
Yeah, I mean, what does Holly Holm have going for her that makes her the one who's finally going to beat Cyborg? I mean, she's stronger than most Cyborg opponents.
Yeah.
That she's got that going for her. How does that strength carry out in the fight, other than just being difficult to clinch with? Maybe like it's hard to control her in the clinch, but she's not. It doesn't really usually translate into much power, and she's not very assertive with her strength, and she's got great cardio. But Cyborg's cardio has looked pretty damn good as well. And if she's not being forced into some kind of war, and as long as she doesn't get reckless and start throwing with wild abandon, then she's probably not going to tire out just from Holly Holm, like doing a lot of nothing. So I don't know. I just don't see Holly Holm's path to victory here other than by neutralizing as much as she can and hoping to get lucky.
Yep. Odds on the fight, Cris Cyborg is a sizable favorite, opened at -400, brief spike at some point, some odds adjustment, and is drifted down to -362. And Holly Holm opened at +300, dropped to +248, and has slowly risen to +286. feels about right for a Cyborg fight, for Cyborg's best opponent in a long time, at least since Marlos Conan.
Yeah.
That it would be, much closer than the minus 1,000 odds we usually see, but still a strong favorite.
Still going to be awesome if Holm wins, though. It'd be awesome if she does. She's very likable, Holm. Like,
yeah.
I know. Anytime I talk about Holm, I'm just racked with guilt because I find her so frustrating to watch. But she's really nice.
Yeah,
and
she's like a darling person, and
she's had some great moments, man. Like, she has really done some impressive things. It's just, I don't know. What's she gonna do to Cyborg? I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com week in, week out. Give us a like over on YouTube. That's the thumbs up thing down there. That helps us a ton. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM. That's where you get all the latest Bloody Elbow videos, shows, news, analysis, all that as well. We also have a Bloody Elbow YouTube channel now, I believe, for our other premium content, more polished, high production videos, not just me screaming into a microphone in my office at home.
Maybe someday we'll be good enough and polished enough to get on that channel.
Yeah. Find that, subscribe to that too, all that good stuff. I'll be back with the 6th round for UFC 219, and then next week I believe is a week off. So we will be back for the MMA Depressed Us, and we'll have If I Did It and Heavy Hands and Knuckle Up and all the good shows we do week in, week out. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.